Good morning, and I'd like to share a story with you about a closing that took place recently, where Dr. Sam Wright acquired the practice of Saline Dental Group, a nice practice located in Bryant, Arkansas. And every month we try to share the successes that the CBI team has in helping sellers and buyers of companies come together, put a deal together that works for both sides of the deal, with CBI in the middle, helping to negotiate and help them come to an agreement that works for both parties. So I thought this time, rather than writing this out, I'd do a brief video to let you know how this deal came together, because it was rather unusual and featured several things that CBI is uniquely qualified to do. This story started back in September of 2021 when Dr. Wright called me out of the blue and said he needed some help with his practice. He was trying to determine the direction he wanted to go with his practice. And in doing so, I discovered that he was no longer in Mena, Arkansas, which is where I thought he was, but he actually had a practice located about 5 or 6 blocks from our home here in Benton, Arkansas. So I asked Dr. Wright if he could meet with me, and he and his wife, Heather, agreed to do so. We met at their practice on Friday, and I listened to Dr. Wright, asked several questions, tried to make sure that I understood what he was trying to do. He was not interested in selling his practice. He was interested in growing his practice. And as we talked this through and he told me what he wanted to do, I realized he needed to acquire his real estate because the real estate that he was in, that he had been leasing for several years, simply was not suited to a multi practitioner location. So I asked him about that, how that would look if he were able to acquire it. And he said he just couldn't acquire the property. The landlord would not sell. So trying to go above and beyond the call of duty and just trying to help him. I said, well, let me meet with the accountant and see if I mean, with the landlord and see if I can help him understand why we would want to buy the property. Fortunately, I was able to do so by utilizing some of our techniques that we have. And the landlord told me why he could not sell. And it was a reasonable thing. So I went back and I visited with Dr. Wright and Heather again. And I said, this is not going to work for you to acquire this real estate. So you've really only got a couple of choices. You've either got to um, buy a piece of property and build your own building that would allow you to do this. And we talked through that some. I said, or you could acquire another practice. And I saw Dr. Wright's eyes light up, and he said, well, I never thought about that. I said, well, that's a quick and easy way to accomplish. I didn't say easy, I said a quicker way to accomplish your objectives. So I spelled that out for him. And we have a unique program with CBI called TAP, Target Acquisition Program, whereby we work for the buyer. The buyer becomes our client rather than the seller. We don't do it very often. We generally work for the seller. Dr. Wright agreed, paid a retainer for me to begin this work, and we identified quite a few practices in the area in which he was interested. He very quickly focused on only two practices that he thought would be of interest, and the one that he was most interested in, by a very, very unusual coincidence, was the practice of my personal dentist, Dr. Lane Smith at Saline Dental Group. So having a relationship with Dr. Smith, having met with him a number of times, and he and I had formed a bit of a personal relationship. I sent Dr. Smith a note. And I said, Rick, would you be interested in talking with a buyer that I have for your dental practice? He's interested in it. And Lane sent me back a note. He said, no, I'm not interested right now. And I said, well, if you get interested later, let me know. Well, in just a very, very brief period of time, not even a full day, Lane sent back a note and said, let's talk. It turned out that Lane had been wary of selling his practice that was a cherished personal practice he'd had for many, many years. He was wary of selling it to a corporate group. Well, when I told him that I was representing an individual, that's really what changed his mind. So we started putting the deal together, following our normal ways of doing things. And there was a culture fit. Dr. Wright fit in very well with Dr. Smith and with Dr. Smith's longtime partner, Dr. Rick Kane, two fine individuals. And there was a culture fit. We began to work our way through the deal. And as we saw that we were going to be able to come to an agreement at some point, I suggested to Dr. Wright that he use our Loans for Business program, which allows him to find out how much he could borrow to buy the practice. That was also contingent on us doing something else a little unusual, which was to get a pro forma done by a third party to look at what the combined practices would look like in terms of revenue and expenses. Because as you put the two together, it really became 1 + 1 = 3. But we needed a third party to look at that, give us realistic projections so that we could base our offer and our lending on that number that was objectively obtained by a third party from a third party. We identified a group that helped us with that. We put the transaction, put the loan package together through the greatly skilled usage of our loans for business administrator, Kelly Tivis. Kelly began to shop the deal. In the meantime, Dr. Wright had a lender that he already had in place, and his lender was a good lender from his perspective, had done what he had asked them to do, and he felt very confident that they would do the transaction. So as we began to work the loans for business, we identified very quickly several lenders that were interested in doing the transaction. One in particular was really excited to be able to have a shot at it, but Dr. Wright, wisely, I think, said, well, let's go down the path with the lender that I already have. Because there was a fee involved for him to follow the other lenders that we had in loans for business, and we weren't going to charge him for the one that he already had in mind. So the one he had in mind, we'd already given all the same information to. We'd given to everybody else that was involved in looking at it from a lending perspective. His lender asked for several more items, and it took another week and a half, 2 weeks to finally get it to the point where they said, "Now we can't do this deal. We don't think that you're paying a reasonable price for the target practice." Well, Dr. Wright and I talked about that. We knew that was wrong, but that was his lender's perspective. And by the way, most lenders are like Mark Twain said, they'll loan you their umbrella until it starts to rain, then they want it back. And this lender that he had was a very conservative lender. They wanted us to go back and try to get the price lowered from the target group that Dr. Wright had identified, Saline Dental Group. I knew that that would not be a good strategy for Dr. Wright. It was the right thing for him to pay the price that he did because it was a really very, very good fit for him. So we quickly transitioned to the other group that wanted to do the deal. They were excited as they could be to get back in the hunt. They jumped on it. They approved it in less than a week. And a little over 2 weeks later, we were able to close on a transaction that did the deal for Dr. Wright in a way that he has an opportunity to acquire the real estate with a lease with an option to purchase. He has acquired a wonderful additional associate in Dr. Rick Kane, who's going to stay on for a period of time while Dr. Smith has gone ahead and retired. And it enabled Dr. Wright to bring in another associate, Dr. Matt Engelberger, to sign on to be a dentist practitioner with him. So Dr. Wright has taken a major step towards achieving his goals of having a practice in Bryan, Arkansas. That's a major practice and a stepping stone to other practices should he decide to do that. So CBI brought a buyer and a seller together representing the buyer. The buyer sent me a wonderful note and said that he knew that this would never have happened without the intervention of CBI. Dr. Smith and I, who have again formed a really great personal relationship, Dr. Smith took me to lunch after the closing, and he said, Carl, I saw God's hand in this as you guided it through. So the great pleasure that we get at CBI is bringing deals together that work for the seller, work for the buyer, and of course, ultimately work for the broker, thanks to Loans for Business and Kelly Tivis. So that's a story for you. If you need to know more, let me know. I'll be glad to share it with you. And I hope that you folks who are dental practitioners out there will take a listen to this and ask questions. And if you're thinking about selling or buying a practice, give us a call. We can help you. Call us at 479-770-8989, or you can email us at confidential@cbiteam.com. Thanks. I hope you have a great day.